Through 6 years of fearsome battles, over 60 million deaths, millions more in casualties, the Second World War remains the most deadliest conflict in human history, and it serves as a stark warning of how political, economic instability, combined with hate and greed, can lead to chaos and destruction and untold human suffering in the world. There's a famous quote about war by E. E. Knight that there are no winners in war, only survivors. And you might be thinking, well, how the Second World War happened so long ago? How is it still relevant today? Well, we've just seen in the past year, Russia invading Ukraine, that the war has returned to Europe for the first time in 78 years. And a lot of the same factors that led to the start of that war are the same factors that led to the start of the Second World War. And I think it's important to tell the story of the Second World War and for all history because the cliche says those who don't study history are doomed to repeat it. So I think it's important to tell this story. Um, I'll talk a little bit about the actions that led to the Second World War. Those really started with the end of the First World War, where Germany and the Austro-Hungarian Empire were defeated. Germany had to make humiliating concessions to the Allies, the Treaty of Versailles. In the surrender, they had to give up land, pay billions of reparations to the Allies. That really ruined the German economy. Hyperinflation set in. Money was virtually worthless, and all this political economic instability in Germany, but also Italy, led to the rise of far-right governments like the Nazi Party in Germany, the Fascist Party in Italy, and that allowed dictators like Benito Mussolini and most importantly Adolf Hitler to gain support through they promised to bring back stability to the country, promised jobs to the unemployed, provide food to the hungry, and they did it a lot by scapegoating people like certain ethnic groups like Hitler blamed the Jews for the failures of the First World War and as an overall problem in society, and really Germany, and they set to eradicate this. They set to by creating more land for the German people, and that's really started their eyes on world domination, where they teamed up with Italy and Japan in Asia to create an axis towards, and the aim was to create world domination through military conflict. Um, Early on, Ger- Allies, France, England were very keen to avoid war, and that this gave Germany its opening. They kept making concessions to Germany. They allowed them to reunite with Austria, and they allowed Germany to take parts of Czechoslovakia, a neighboring state. And eventually, this non-aggression eventually came to nothing because on September 1st, 1939, the Second World War as we know it began when Germany invaded Poland. At the time, Germany made an unlikely um, allied with the Soviet Union and divided up Poland. And at this point, France and England teamed up to declare war on Germany. And for the first few years of the war, nothing much happened until 1940. Germany swept through and conquered most of Europe: Denmark, Norway, Netherlands, Belgium, Luxembourg, and most importantly, France, where they cut through the Ardennes forest and cut off the British and the French forces at Dunkirk, where for a miracle, a lot of them were allowed, for a lot of them got back to England. But at this point, Germany conquered most of Europe. They tried to conquer England. This was one of the first big battles of the war, Battle of Britain, where the British Royal Air Force managed to stop the Germans from getting air supremacy, which meant they couldn't invade England, and so that forced Germany to turn in 1941 towards the Soviet Union, which was the defining act of the war. Also, in 1941, on December 7th, Japan bombed the U.S. naval base in Hawaii at Pearl Harbor. This brought America into the war, and at the same time, Hitler declared war on the United States, which was not probably the right move to do, but he did that. Germany early on made big gains in the Soviet Union, but in 1941, winter set in, and two big battles really turned the course of the war for the good. Battle of Stalingrad, where German forces couldn't deal with the winter. They were surrounded in the city and were forced to surrender. A huge part of the Sixth Army that conquered France were forced to surrender if they weren't killed. And They also lost that curse, the biggest military battle in 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 history. And I really, from then on, Germany was on the retreat, and at the same time, the United States won the Battle of Midway in the Pacific Ocean, and that really turned the war. After that, next couple of years is really a slow attrition towards the inevitable. Um, the U.S. lands at Omaha Beach. It frees France's. Germany is being surrounded by both sides, and eventually they have no choice. Hitler commits suicide in the bunker, and on May 7th, 1945, Germany surrenders to the Allies. And 2 months later, 3 months later, United States ends the war by dropping two atomic bombs on Japan, on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And on September 2nd, 1945, 6 years and a day from the start of the war, Japan officially surrenders and the war is over. And the consequences of the war weren't just that. It was the most important thing at the end of the war was that the Axis were defeated, especially the racist German ideology, which saw um, 6 million Jews killed during the Holocaust. Not just Jews, but other ethnic groups such as Slavic people, Roma, Gypsies, homosexuals, disabled people, mentally and physically challenged people. Um, and really, the end of the war saw the rise of two world powers, the United States and the Soviet Union, now Russia, and they were allies during the war because they formed together to defeat the greater enemy, which was Nazi Germany. And but really, the use of atomic bombs, eventually both sides built up nuclear stockpiles, and this led to the Cold War, which was 45 years of amazing geopolitical tension between the two sides. They never fought directly, but they fought a lot in proxy wars, like in Korea and Vietnam. And another of the founding things of the end of the First World War was that um, the lessons were learned from the First World War that basically that there had to be better international cooperation between states in order to avoid future wars. So the United Nations was set up, the International Monetary Fund was set up, and this was used to avoid future conflicts. And largely, it's worked. There's always going to be wars, but through the combination of diplomacy and also the threat of nuclear weapons means another large-scale war, hopefully, is avoidable. Um, Obviously, the most staggering thing about the Second World War was the effect it had on people. Millions of people died, millions were displaced, and never saw loved ones again. People had to move. Um, and then the most important, but we've seen that like a lot of it between the end of the Cold War, where the world divided into two camps, democracies versus pretty much oppressive dictatorships, is what we're seeing now still between like we have the United States and the Western European states on one side, and you have Russia and Iran and China with more North Korea with more oppressive dictatorial regimes. So it's interesting how a lot of what was applicable then is still applicable today. I think the defining thing about the Second World War was that the Nazis were defeated, that Italy was defeated, Japan was defeated, and that the most dangerous and evil of all modern political ideologies, Nazism, was largely defeated and eradicated from the world. And that's the most important thing about the Second World War. If you take away one thing, hope you enjoyed the presentation. Hope you learned something, and hopefully we can learn from the lessons to a better future. Thank you.